Vasishta continued, O Ram, living like this, constantly inquiring into the nature of the self, attain peace. So it's a constant effort. This state of consciousness can be attained by the cultivation of dispassion, the study of scriptures, the instructions of a guru, and by the persistent practice of inquiry. It's not that Rama is a spiritual seeker at this point, he's a spiritual practitioner. But if the awakened intelligence is keen and sharp, you will attain it even without the other aids. And this is the point. The intelligence has to have been awakened, which means it must have stumbled upon its own nature as pure awareness. And at that point, then you can use whatever means at your disposal to establish yourself in this awareness. First of all, you stumble upon it, you touch it, then you appreciate what it is, and you appreciate the necessity of being established in that awareness, in that consciousness. And that establishment is by constantly inquiring into the nature of the self. I've said before that there's a preconception that liberation is something you break into and that's it, it's all bliss from there on. But it seems to me that that's not the case. It seems to me that once you've broken through into what might be called liberation, that situation has to be vigorously maintained. It requires an ongoing effort. And if that sounds like a hard slog, then it isn't, because you realise that there isn't any other effort worth making. Rama asked, Holy Sir, some there are who rest in self-knowledge, who are enlightened and yet engage themselves in activities. And there are others who isolate themselves and practice contemplation, Samadhi. Of these, who is the better? And now we've got an exploration of the term Samadhi, which has got lots of different shades of meaning. Here it's described as contemplation or meditation, but it usually means a specific meditation. Right Samadhi is one of the limbs of the Buddha's Eightfold Path, and it's usually translated into English as right concentration or right meditation. And it refers to being established in a concentrated or focused state, which often leads to what is called a higher state of consciousness. Vasishta replied, Rama, that is Samadhi, contemplation or meditation, in which one realizes the objects of the senses as not self, and thus one enjoys inner calmness and tranquility at all times. So we've got an interpretation of the term Samadhi into something which is spiritually meaningful. Having realized that the objects are related only to the mind, and therefore constantly resting in inner peace, some are engaged in activity, while others live in isolation. Both of them enjoy the bliss of contemplation. If the mind of one who appears to be in Samadhi is distracted, he is a madman. On the other hand, if the mind of one who appears to be a madman is free from all notions and distractions, he is enlightened and he is in unbroken Samadhi. So basically, Samadhi is about not being distracted by notions of objects or apparent objects. Whether he is engaged in activity or he lives in isolation in a forest, in enlightenment there is no distinction. The mind which is free from conditioning is not tainted even while it is engaged in activity. The non-action of the mind is known as quiescence, Samadhana. It is total freedom. It is blessedness. If you're not caught up in the notions of an external world and so on, then you can engage in notions. You can use notions to communicate, to think about things, to work through ideas, to plan. None of these things are incompatible with Samadhi. The point is that you're not getting caught up in them. It's a bit like the physicist who teaches the model of the atom as a central nucleus with little electrons spinning around it. This is the so-called solar system model of the atom. The physicist knows it's not true. It's got very little relationship to what his real understanding is. But in terms of communicating something, this is an initial step. So the scientist can talk in terms of the solar system model of the atom, but he knows that's not the reality of it. He's got no investment in it. He will dismiss that model if challenged to do so. And this is the same as the person in Samadhi. They will talk using notions, using ideas, but when pressed on these, he or she will just let them go and acknowledge they've got no intrinsic reality. They'll have no emotional investment in any of these ideas. The person in Samadhi won't have any pet notions, won't have any pet theories. The difference between contemplation and its absence is indicated by whether or not there is movement of thought in the mind, hence make the mind unconditioned. So movement of thought, does this mean the same as thinking? And if it does mean the same as thinking, well, why not just say whether or not there is thinking in the mind? Movement of thought means movement of the attention towards certain ideas, towards getting distracted. Movement here is in the sense of distraction, is when the attention gets distracted and lost in various thoughts or notions. And that movement, that distraction only arises from conditioning, from psychological conditioning. Hence make the mind unconditioned. The unconditioned mind is firm, and that in itself is meditation, freedom and peace eternal. The conditioned mind is the source of sorrow, and the unconditioned mind is a non-actor and attains to the supreme state of enlightenment. So the unconditioned mind is a non-actor in the sense that it doesn't actually do anything. Hence one should work to remove all mental conditioning. That is known as contemplation or samadhi, in which all the desires and hopes concerning the world have ceased, and which is free from sorrow, fear and desire, and by which the self rests in itself. Mentally renounce all false identification of the self with objects here, and then live where you like, either at home or in a mountain cave. To that householder whose mind has attained utter quiescence, his house itself is the forest. It's the forest free from distractions. If the mind is at peace and if there is no ego sense, even cities are as void. On the other hand, forests are like cities to him whose heart is full of desires and other evils. The distractions of the mind subside in deep sleep. Enlightenment attains enlightenment. Do as you please. The distractions of the mind subside in deep sleep. And as we've heard often enough, deep sleep is the nature of the enlightened one. They're unperturbed by what is going on round about them.